Coming to the final 16th, our Brain Trust Not That Brady and Tex on the inside. The three of them across the track.
They're in the final furlong, and Mucho Gusto now pours it on, opens up 3. Harvey Wallbanger got a ground-saving trip. He has the short stretch to work with, but he's under a full head of steam now.
A 5-length lead for another twist of fate. A 7-length lead as he comes to the 16th pole.
It's War of Will from Country House, then Royland, War of Will, whilst one of them again.
Cortland Simmons with you here at the CS Racing Report 2019 Road to the Kentucky Derby edition. A montage of stake races over the last couple of weeks, in which we've seen horses maneuver themselves into Kentucky Derby contention and what I call February Madness, before we get into, of course, what's officially known as March Madness, and then we get into the April races that lead into the Run for the Roses to be held at historic Churchill Downs. And right now, it looks like some horses are beginning to emerge. But again, it's very early. Things can change so quickly, like the seasons. The Robert Lewis, as we go all the way from one coast to the other, all the way from the east to the left coast to the Great Race Place at Santa Anita. And in the Robert Lewis, the race named after, of course, the two-time Kentucky Derby and Preakness winning owner, was a horse in here for a trainer who, of course, Bob Lewis teamed up with to win to give this particular outfit and Bob Lewis himself their first Kentucky Derby. That would be Bob Baffert, and that was Silver Charm back in 1997. This race named in his honor. It's Grade 3, $150,000, going the same route as the Holy Bull, 1 mile and a 16th. And in this race, the pace scenario for the sham winner, Gunmetal Gray, who won that race in what some thought was a eye-opening performance, but statistically didn't really be a great. It wasn't a great closing finish for him. It was more of a case of a war of attrition, or sort of a win by default, because other horses on the front end completely shut down. There's another horse in that race that we'll talk about, Sueno, that finished second to Gunmetal Gray, who was successful in his outside bid, roaring up on the outside to win that race. Going in to this Robert B. Lewis, Gunmetal Gray, it was projected that the pace scenario wasn't going to set up for him with his closing style, and that Mucho Gusto, the runner-up to Bob Baffert's other horse, Improbable, who's considered to be part of that big Baffert brigade of top horses in the Los Alamitos Futurity, a race in which, even though he was beaten by about 5 lengths, he ran very strongly, didn't throw in the towel at the end like he was an extremely tired horse. And he was able to show in that race that he's got good speed, but some were wondering how far can he go. Son of Mucho Macho Man, the 2013 Breeders' Cup Classic winner. But what was interesting, on paper, it would appear, based on previous tactics and back class, that Mucho Gusto would take the lead and carve out the fractions, and Gunmetal Gray would have to hope, for the best in closing. And that's another point that we're going to make about him in this recap. And what was interesting was that Mucho Gusto did not take the full initiative. Other horses, according to Joe Talamo, his rider, went ahead and took off, and they decided to relax, which was a plan that Bob Baffert was wanting to employ, and to be able to do that in February in a graded stakes race is very encouraging. He showed a new dimension by being able to sit off the pace a little bit there and show that early speed without using up all of his oxygen and all of his O2. And he was able to make that accessible move on the turn in a race in which, where it's set up, it was 23.67 for the quarter, 46.55 for the half, another swift half mile, 110.51 for the 3 quarters, the fastest 3 quarters out of any of these preps that we've talked about. 135.57 for the mile, 141.81 for the mile and a 16th as a final time. That's very impressive, very comparable to what Improbable ran when he beat Mucho Gusto in the Los Al. What'll be interesting is when Improbable comes back, can he run faster, and is Mucho Gusto still going to be 5 lengths inferior to Improbable? That's going to be the interesting thing. Or are these horses going to even up, where what you saw in Improbable is the best that you could see? We may not find that out, because Baffert may split these horses up. It'll be interesting to see where he goes, but Mucho Gusto wins very impressively, time-wise, visually, and also tactically, being able to rate and sit off the pace rather than be a horse that absolutely has to have the lead. So he's not a war emblem type, at least up to this point, where he has to be keyed up and he needs the lead in order to be effective. He wins by 4 3/4 lengths over Gunmetal Gray, who did come on to finish a half length in front of Easy Shot, which also begs the strategic question. Gunmetal Gray, he was able to get away with coming from off the pace from a significant margin, significant amount of ground in the sham. But as time goes on, even though the distances might favor a horse that likes to close, you still got to have acceleration, you've got to have the gears, and what's most important is, I think that whether it's a 1.125 in his next prep or the 1.16 against better horses, theoretically, he is going to have to be within, he can't be 10 lengths off with 3 furlongs to go, whether, you know, the front end breaks down completely or not, because somebody in the middle, the stalk and pace horses, are going to get first run on him. And as we all know, whether it's the Travers, the Kentucky Derby, the Breeders' Cup, somebody's going to come in there and run a monster race unless it ends up being a war of attrition and a Kentucky Derby by default. And the same holds true prior to that, because there's still one step left, whether it be the Santa Anita Derby, the Louisiana Derby, whichever race Jerry Hollendorfer and West Point Thoroughbreds pick out for him. He is going to have to show a little bit more early or middle race speed. He's going to have to, when we get a half mile into it, he's going to have to show a little bit of closing speed and forward placement in order to have a shot to hit the board, much less win one of these big races. That's the big knock right now on Gunmetal Gray, although it can be, although the encouraging part is that he has run well, given these deficiencies to in this case get the place spot behind Mucho Gusto, who once again wins by 4 3/4 lengths, sitting from a little bit off the pace, showing front running tactics but not absolutely needing the lead. That is something that's very, very key to his success and being able to go a route of ground. He wins again by 4 3/4 lengths. Once again, that time 141.81 from Mucho Gusto. It'll be interesting to see if Bob Baffert will take him to Arkansas and he goes the Rebel Arkansas Derby route, or if he goes the Rebel, comes back and runs in the Santa Anita Derby, or he stays in California and runs in the San Felipe and then runs in the Santa Anita Derby, because it's unlikely he'll probably get that much of a break before having to be sent a 1.125. But again, Mucho Gusto is definitely one of the horses that you have to look at as a prime contender, at least at this point during February Madness, for the 2019 Kentucky Derby.
Well, I knew that Joe, he rode the horse with a lot of confidence today, and we talked about after the Los Al Futurity that, you know, we thought, you know, he's to get to the next level, he's going to have to learn to relax, and so today was a good day to get him back off those horses, and, you know, today everything's speed, but, you know, he rode him like he's a good horse, and he responded like a good horse.
They're at the top of the stretch. Mucho Gusto, Gunmetal Gray on the far outside. Easy Shot is in striking range. Magnificent McCool at the rail. They're in the final furlong, and Mucho Gusto now pours it on. Opens up 3. Easy Shot, Gunmetal Gray will battle for second. Mucho Gusto, impressive in victory, cruises home by 5 easy lengths. Gunmetal Gray got up for second. Then it was Easy Shot and Magnificent McCool. Running time 141.81 seconds.
Silver Charm to the front. On the inside, Freehouse. On the outside, Captain Bodgett. It's Captain Bodgett on the outside. Silver Charm at the rail. Those two to the wire. Here's the finish. Silver Charm by a neck with Gary Stevens. Silver Charm there by a nose over Captain Bodgett in the Kentucky Derby.
Thank you for this opportunity. Just to live this day. This is unbelievable.